Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give it about another minute or so as people come into the room, and we'll start up. We're going to begin in about 30 seconds as people still come into the room today. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on prioritizing SEL and self-efficacy. We're going to give it about another 15 seconds and we'll begin. Right. So good afternoon and welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's webinar, Prioritizing SEL and Self-Efficacy Before Post-Secondary Attempts. My name is Nathan Four. I'm the Program Officer for our College Career and Counseling Initiative at the Indiana Youth Institute. We are so glad to have you join us for today's presentation. We're grateful to have a chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers that remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and our children. For those who are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Our goal is to be here for you to support our youth across the state. For technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message to Aaron Whitcomb. IYI's registration manager is behind the scenes to assist you. Use this feature to converse with the group as well. Introduce yourselves, where you're from. We'll send out a PDF of the slides to all participants after today's webinar. We encourage you to ask questions, so please use the QA feature for that if you have any, and we will get to as many as possible. We'll try to save time at the end of today's presentation to answer all questions that have not been answered or addressed. Later today, you'll receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. This is very important for us on our end. So please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's presentation. And if you did not receive the evaluation email, please check your junk email, as it may have been directed there. Once you complete the evaluation, you'll be redirected for your certificate of participation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later or share the opportunity to listen to with partners. So today, the goal for all workers and educators who support our youth's college aspirations is not merely to get them to college, but to graduate college. So what happens when our youth walks across their high school commencement stage and enters the college campuses? Well, today we're going to explore the data around college retention, persistence, and the trends on college campuses. Then we'll shift focus and examine what we can do as youth-serving workers to build the necessary skills through K-12 that'll best equip the youth to achieve their college dreams. And with that, we have two great presenters. Dr. Michelle Hansen is the Associate Vice President of Institutional Research and Planning at The Ohio State University. This involves developing and leading the Office of Institutional Research and Planning team within the Office of Academic Affairs. We also have Dr. Nathan Schamlaffel, who is the proprietor and senior consultant of Driven Strategic, LLC. He has a vast experience with his work at a university level. He has worked with youth organizations and consulting with professional organizations. And with that, I'll kick it off to Michelle.
Yeah, so just give me a moment to bring up my PowerPoint. You know that this always takes a moment. So give me a thumbs up if you can see that and hear me okay. Great. So thank you so much for this time and space devoted to really working together to ensure student success and degree completion. And I designed this presentation to provide kind of an overview of the higher education landscape, understanding some trends, some national statistics in terms of completion rates, retention rates, persistence rates, and then Nathan's going to lead a discussion about using this information based on his perspective of working with youth of all ages and college students to really understand what we can do to improve student success and learning. So with that, kind of an overview of this presentation. I'm going to provide an overview of some trends and some statistics and numbers, but as I go along, I want to provide context to that and what's going on at the national level in terms of student persistence and retention. And we often pay attention to student retention rates because that is the students who start at an institution and then return either at that institution or another institution a year later. And we know that that's important because it's an early indicator of success. And we know that students who aren't retained or don't persist to that next year, that's often a good predictor of whether or not a student will ultimately attain a degree credential. And many institutions in higher ed are focused on retaining students because we know if they leave, they're less likely to come back and they often incur debt. And we're trying to improve success rates at all levels for our families and students. I'm also going to highlight some characteristics of today's college students and share some challenges that we're facing. I think all of us in higher education are trying to re-engage students. I know we're not completely post-pandemic, but that's a phrase that's used in the literature where we're trying to re-engage students that are feeling disconnected. We know, and we have to acknowledge that there were learning gaps with this shift to online learning. And it's not just the fault of students. We, as faculty members in higher education and teachers, it was challenging to really engage students and develop effective pedagogy for that online learning when most of us were used to teaching students in a classroom setting. I'll talk about some major issues many institutions of higher education are facing and where we're putting our efforts and resources. I'll highlight what the research indicates about factors associated with student success. So if you start to look at the literature or do a website search, you'll see all kinds of factors. So here I'm highlighting those fundamental factors that show up in the empirical based literature again and again in terms of factors that are associated with student persistence. I'll explain what interventions and strategies colleges and universities are implementing to enhance student success. You have a better understanding of kind of what we're doing at the post-secondary or higher education level. And then we can discuss how we can collaborate to improve student retention and persistence. And one thing I want to note that a webinar is a great format, but it's really hard to foster interaction and I can't see you very well, but please use the chat if you have questions and Nathan's going to interrupt me if there's a burning question. I always like to be as interactive as possible and I will go through as quickly as possible to address questions at the end. So here's some data. What this data means is retention rate means that beginning cohort of students at an institution, did they return 1 year later? So we always look at fall. So this is like fall 2021. Did they return that new group of first time in college students? Did they return a year later at the same institution? The persistence rate means that they returned later at any institution. So of course, that's going to be a little bit higher. And it's important to look at this trend because you can see we're losing about 25% of our students are leaving after that first year. And again, it's a really good indicator of early success because it's not likely that those students are going to re-engage and actually attain that degree. And this is an aggregate of all types of institutions. So here is a look at disaggregating, and you can see notable differences between and this is looking at a 4-year degree granting by control, in other words, public, private, and also the selectivity of an institution. So you can see here, there's remarkable, I would say, well, notable differences between type of institution as well as selectivity. So just to give an understanding of where different institutions fall and make it a little bit more concrete, where I work, OSU, the acceptance rates is about 57%. So we would fall into that kind of red bar in terms of whether we are our acceptance rates or selectivity. And Notre Dame would fall into that private, not-for-profit University of Notre Dame, and they have a very selective, their acceptance rates is 15.1%. For example, Stanford is a private and their acceptance rates is 3.9%. So you can see the more selective institutions tend to have higher retention rates. So that just gives you an idea. Purdue's acceptance rates is 68%. IU's is around 85%. So it just gives you an understanding of, and most of you understand the difference between your private nonprofit and for-profit. It basically means your nonprofit are investing all their profits back into the teaching, learning environment and their teaching service and research missions, where your private for-profit are like your University of Phoenix and some of those online. So this just gives an indication. And this looks at the 2-year community colleges for the most part, and their retention rates or persistence rates. So I'm showing this to you so it kind of sets the stage for what we're facing in terms of higher education and what we're looking at in terms of retention rates, persistence rates, as well as degree completion. So this is a look at the completion rates, and they account for all students who enter post-secondary education for the first time each year. Enrolling, this looks at full-time or part-time at 2-year or 4-year institutions. And this is an understanding of those who complete after transfer and not just completions at the starting institution. So this kind of captures today's diverse student pathways to success and the types of institutions they're enrolling in. So this is some data, and what I've done in each of these slides is I tried to show the source. So each of these slides, there's full reports and more context that you can easily access, because Nathan is providing a resource site where you'll have a PDF of all this information, so you can dig deeper if you want. If you're like me, I do data for a living and analyze data, so I could spend all day in these reports, but I'm just sharing with you some highlights. And these are kind of the headlines. I know this is a little wordy, but at least you get the headlines in terms of, out of all the students who start college 6 years ago, 37.7 have yet to complete a degree or credential. So that's why it's so important to work together, because we know about the importance of that degree credential in terms of social mobility, earning potential, well-being, all that research that states the importance of earning that degree credential, especially for these students who intended to go to college. These are the students who actually started college, and they often leave with debt. And you all know much of what I'm saying. I'm just kind of repeating some things and reiterating some things you already know and working in your diverse roles and spheres of influence. And this shows that we're really not making a lot of progress in terms of completion rates. We're getting a little bit better than they were during the pandemic, but we're still kind of lagging in where we'd like to see our completion rates as a nation. The completion rates did decrease at similar rates for white students and African American and Black students and Latinx students, but they increased actually for Asian, and this is a new statistic that I'm not familiar with, we're seeing improvement in terms of Native American students. Now, we have relatively low numbers at many institutions, but that's kind of some good news. And the gender gap in completion rates is steadily growing and is widest since 2008. And the gender gap means actually women do better and complete at higher rates. So these are kind of the headlines, and you can read these in terms of what the key issues that these reports are pointing out. And these are from very reliable sources, the National Student Clearinghouse, and our iPads, and all the kind of the national rates on persistence rates. So the overall persistence rates of students who started again was about that 75.7%. And we're also seeing a higher share of students being retained at their starting institution, because many institutions like OSU, like IU, like Purdue, actually all institutions, the fiscal reality is that we want to retain our students because we're very much focused on the revenue based on tuition, credit hours, and we also feel a moral obligation to make sure that once students do start, that we provide them with holistic support so they're able to be retained at our institutions. We know that students successfully transfer, but they can also experience transfer shock and some other things that may not be ideal for all students to transfer. It's still an important population. We want those students to be successful, but more and more institutions are investing resources to retain students at our institution. We still see it as a success if they successfully transfer to another institution and complete that degree. And also the size of the fall entering post-secondary cohort did increase. So we're seeing a higher share of students, but the community college cohorts are decreasing, and community college are facing kind of declines in terms of not only the retention of students, but the pipeline. And many community colleges are dealing with the fiscal realities of lower enrollment and lower persistence and retention rates. So here's a look, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out what many institutions of higher ed are focusing on, and that is our equity gaps. In other words, we're seeing a big difference between students of color, except for Asian students that tend to are more likely to earn that degree or credential, compared to particularly our African American and our Latinx students who tend there's opportunity gaps. We know all the reasons, many reasons behind those equity gaps, but we are working hard in higher education to make sure we're including inclusive environments that affirm all identities, where students can bring their authentic selves, so we can help address these equity gaps. And I often say it's not just a moral imperative, it's become mission critical, because we want to make sure when the students start here that we provide all the support necessary and we're closing those equity gaps. And here's just a list of things that kind of highlight, underscore the importance of our collaboration. And this is many of the issues that us, and when I say us, I know I'm speaking for many in higher education, but I often work with other colleagues at different institutions. I do work at OSU, so we are facing, I'm not speaking on behalf of OSU, but we are facing, many of us are facing these types of issues. One of them, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, that we're facing shifts in enrollment. This enrollment cliff that's really affecting the fact that we have fewer high school graduates that are attending, planning to, or actually the pool of high school graduates is declining because of many national trends in terms of birth rates and other things. Then we're facing another issue, and that is students are choosing not to enroll in higher education. They're not wanting to incur the debt, the stress of earning a college degree, and they're really wanting to gain that work experience and gain skills there rather than getting that credential. So many of us are facing in higher education. OSU is doing well in this regard because we have the share of the market in Ohio. And so we're not facing these issues as much as other institutions. And I spent 22 years at IUPUI and IU, and that's a very much part of that conversation. So we want to support our students to ensure access and academic success. So it's not just completion rates and not just retention rates, but also making sure our students are thriving. They're feeling a sense of well-being. We're trying to address we're trying to make sure that students feel that sense of belonging, that community, that they fit. That is shown again and again and again to be a really good predictor of student success and learning. Again, we're trying to address equity gaps. We're learning that our students are facing student mental health issues like never before, and I'll show some statistics on that in a moment. We're also working on cost containment, so better use of data to make better decisions about where we're allocating resources, so we can make sure that we are making better decisions and reducing debt for students. We're trying to evaluate our programs and interventions to make sure that we are keeping and retaining those students that are, or those programs that are improving student success and allocating resources to them, but some cases making decisions to not continue programs that are not showing success. We're trying to use our data and analytics to better predict and understand student outcomes so we can intervene early when students are facing barriers. And we're also, I'm sure you've talked about this, whether it be at your dinner tables or with your colleagues or in your role, but really navigating that use and ethics of generative AI and artificial intelligence. For example, we know that AI can be really effective and ethically used to detect cancer. I've seen stories and heard that it's used to analyze large quantities of data, like the Innocence Project uses it to understand inconsistencies in eyewitness testimony, and actually they've used it to overturn wrongful convictions. So there's a lot of good uses of AI, but we're trying to do it ethically, and we are trying to grapple with it, what it means in higher education, especially in the classroom environment. We need to learn how to govern, set policies. We know that students are going to use AI to complete assignments and to write papers, but we're still kind of all grappling with that. So these are just some headlines. This is just the actual data on the enrollment cliff. So again, we're seeing a 15% decline in students going to college. And it's not just students going to college, but the overall pool of high school graduates is also decreasing. So many institutions are very much focused on enrollment. And this is a recent article just published in April 22 about the stunning level. This is quite a gripping headline, a stunning level of student disconnection. So this is just what they did. They asked, it wasn't the most systematic study, but nonetheless, it tells us kind of a pulse of what's going on across the nation, that faculty members were writing in about students using words like defeated, exhausted, overwhelmed. And it's not only students that are feeling this, faculty also felt this way. So professors are reporting, this is some of the, from that article, that what professors are reporting. Again, large sample, but I still think it's a good pulse of the kind of the nation, that students are struggling to recall basic information. It's difficult to motivate them after those years of kind of that shift to online learning, the disconnection, and students seem to have lost their sense of connection with the university. So here's some things that faculty are doing and exerting their efforts to try to respond to this. So we're reaching out. Faculty are now in higher education as part of their role. It's not just their research and service, but they play an important role and enhancing student success and learning. And you're going to meet Nate. You've already known Nathan. He's very committed to improving student success and learning as a college professor. But many see their more, traditionally more focused on that research and service mission, but certainly more focused on playing a role in terms of student success and learning, spending more time in community building, spending time with students before class, asking them how they're doing, and really engaging in students and taking more of a intentional effort. And oftentimes it means changing the curriculum, focusing on replacing those high stakes multiple exam with smaller, more frequent assignments. Also, there's a focus on improving inclusion in the classroom in terms of using multiple methods to assess learning. In other words, engaging student in reflection and writing, and to bring out more of their authentic self than just your multiple choice tests. They still play a role, but we're really trying in higher education to use multiple ways. Still having deadlines, but perhaps flexible when life comes up. It's not the fault of a student. It doesn't mean that they weren't putting in a lot of effort. It means that life got in the way. So here is some research on sense of belonging. Strayhorn is one of my kind of go-to researchers in this space. And we're very much focused on higher education, trying to improve students' sense of belonging. So it means a feeling of mattering, being enough, and here with a purpose, feeling a sense of a purpose in attaining that degree. And he talks about, as educators, the role we can play in that, to be high tech, high contact learning environment, making sure that students are navigating clubs and college and doing more outreach in terms of student organizations they can belong, where students feel supported, cared about, their identities are affirmed. So I highly encourage you. I'm just doing this very briefly today to kind of show some things, but I encourage you to take some time. I've linked here about 5 things you should know about sense of belonging. And this is startling. This is kind of almost upsetting to me, but this is the one of the inventories that has been collected to show kind of student scores. This is called the, hold on a second, and I'll get the exact title of this. I've got so many acronyms in my head. It's the Counseling Center Assessment of Psychological Symptoms is what it's called. So you can see here that generalized anxiety, it has increased, social anxiety. So this is real data. It's not just anecdotes or talking about this, but this level of academic distress is students are feeling concerned, worried about how they're doing in school. There's even items that say they dread being in the classroom. So this is very concerning, and some statistics. There has been a decrease in alcohol use, which is good, but family distress is certainly increased, and overall distress. So this just shows you some actual data in terms of the levels of stress and anxiety our students are experiencing. And this is another report that shows, in a lot of higher education researchers and scholars are focusing on this in terms of what we're trying to address in higher education. So mental health needs have soared, concerns about basic needs have intensified. So that's clothing, food, shelter. So it's not just money for other needs, but it's basic needs. And more students are struggling to afford college, and that doesn't mean just being able to pay tuition. It means affording college, buying textbooks, all those things that are necessary in terms of affording college. And we know that learning virtually has mixed results. And also, students are choosing not to attend college. They're choosing to take a year off. So those are some of the things. Just briefly, this just shows, I'm showing this to display that in higher education, we're dealing with the reality that students they don't want that rapid shift to online and take all their classes online, but many students prefer and like the flexibility offered with the online learning classes. So we know that many of our students are doing kind of that hybrid approach. They're taking some of their courses online. And so we need to focus on doing a better job of engaging students in a more effective pedagogy. And this is an interesting statistic. This is Ancora that does research on prospective students. These aren't students who have matriculated. These are students who have decided to go to college, and it's before kind of prospective students. So you can see here is a trend in terms of a lower percentage of experiential interest and social focus. So experiential interests have to do with students that are looking for hands-on, engaging learning experiences. They're very sensitive to affordability. And of course, the social focuses students are very motivated and focused on forming friendships, forming student groups, all the activities that campuses offer. So we're seeing a decrease in that. And Ancora says one of the reasons why we're seeing a decrease is the pipeline has changed, because students, we're seeing fewer low-income students, first-generation students, students of color who tend to have those interests in terms of experiential and social. And interestingly enough, we're seeing more students who are graduate school bound. So they're not only concerned with getting that baccalaureate degree, they're wanting to get the graduate degree also in that master's or PhD or post-baccalaureate. And we in higher education are working with accelerated degree programs and learning and trying to work with students so they can complete those degrees quicker, doing the bachelor degree in 3 years and master's in 1, as it saves money. So this is just something to note. The pandemic laid bare the longstanding inequities and exacerbated. So far too students, especially students of color, and so we have to work to make sure that students get a leg up on college and pathways while they're still in high school. So these are some ways that hopefully we are working together to ensure the students' success, that we're coaching students for academic success and social readiness. So in other words, we're actively helping them understand their goals, reflect on their goals, and actively working with students to attain those goals. It takes a lot of focus on curricular alignment in that K through 16 approach, which requires an intentional approach to making sure we're working together to get that curriculum alignment. That is very hard work and it's not easy. And I can say that we don't always do it well because it requires resources on it from higher education and post-secondary and us working together. And we're trying to include families more and parents in planning our education and ensuring student success. So I'm going through some of this fast because I'm looking at the time, but these are just some factors associated with student persistence. And these are fairly consistent in terms of the literature. Of course, we know that high school GPA, rigor of high school curriculum, are they taking honors classes, AP, how they do in their calculus classes, levels of unmet financial need. We're paying a lot of attention to that in higher education because that's that once federal, state, institutional aid is taken into account, as well as subsidized loans, this is what's left over. And students who have 6,000 or more unmet need are often very much struggle because the only way to make that up is working or taking out private loans that many students don't qualify for. And of course, we know the high sense of belonging. Nathan's going to talk more about the cognitive motivational factors, the self-efficacy, the academic hope, that growth mindset factors. So all of these are kind of factors. And here's what many colleges are doing to improve retention and persistence rates. So you can kind of understand where many institutions in higher education are focusing on their efforts and resources. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through these slides. They are available to you on a PDF because I want to hit a few more high points, and then I want to allow time at the end for you to ask questions. So these are just listing of things that we are trying to do in terms of a higher education environment, creating inclusive environments in and out of the classroom. We're making sure that we're even hiring faculty, so more faculty of students of color, so students see others like them. We're trying to engage faculty in more, excuse me, inclusive classroom environments, the way we state our student learning outcomes, to make sure we're not focusing on a deficit approach. We are focusing on being ready for our diverse learners and students rather than thinking the students have to be ready for us. So I think we're trying to expand in the way in our mindsets in terms of how we do things. And this is just some highlights. I know this is a little hard to read, but these are what many institutions in higher education are focusing on in terms of pandemic recovery, data-informed decisions, and supporting the whole student. So in other words, focusing financial, academic, and social areas. And just some top priorities that we are focusing on is better accountability, metrics, alerts, intervention, early alerts for students so we can address their needs early on. We're disaggregating data so we can understand where there's gaps in terms of retention rates, persistence rates, so disaggregating it by different student groups. And of course, we're trying to do a better job of using analytics and leveraging our analytics across the institution so we can make better decisions and seeing data as an institutional asset and making sure that we're using that data. So we strongly believe that using data to better understand our students and our operations paves the way to developing new innovative approaches for improved student learning, better outcomes. So there's really a focus on investing resources on analytics, the kind of those data science professionals. I lead a large team of data science professionals in using analytics to improve decision-making at OSU. And I did the same thing at IU. This is a recent publication that came out about, this is a pretty bold title, that analytics can save higher education really. And some of the things that we're doing to leverage our analytics across an institution to make sure we're creating that sense of urgency, that we're collecting and using data ethically to make better decisions. We're evaluating our programs that students are participating in to make sure that they're meeting students' goals. This is another topic that came out that we really need an expanded definition of decision makers. It's not just providing data to presidents and provosts, but really those who are interacting with students, such as faculty, peer mentors, so we can get data to those who are making decisions. And this just shows the importance of collaboration, that we're working together toward common goals, and that we are engaging, being intentional. So we are working together in terms of, information sharing, active engagement, which differs from cooperation. That's more like parallel play, and what we do a lot of time in K through 12 and higher education, because we don't have the resources to reach this true collaboration. But with these complex issues we're facing, I think that true collaboration is what we want to strive for, rather than just cooperation where there's little interaction, it's more like parallel play than true collaboration. And again, I'm just going to end with, I highly recommend this book. It talks about what our students are going to need in the future and the types of skills they're going to need in order to really be successful. And these are some new skills, of course, data literacy, technology literacy, because even with all these advanced technologies, we still need a human in the loop, and we still need to make sure that we have this high degree of critical thinking navigating complex problems, so those liberal arts skills. And these are some things I highly recommend this book, Robot Proof. And I covered a lot of ground, and you have access to the slides. And I wanted to make sure I mention this. I can share my email, and I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I'm committed to answering questions, engaging with you after this, if necessary, and please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Michelle, and for painting a picture, with all that data about the current state of what's going on in our universities, the disconnection that you talked about, the anticipated decline in enrollment, what our students are going through. And I really liked how you talked about how the answer to this isn't just at the college level. The answer to this is something that we all need to pull together. I know we have a lot of youth workers out there. And so now let's kind of shift to Nathan Shamloffler here. We'll talk about what can we do as youth workers to help build those skills up so we can have those stronger students.
Hi, everybody. Give me just a second to get my screens pulled up here. And I think we're all ready to go. If you could, give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides and hear me okay. Thank you. And Dr. Hansen, thanks so much for that. I really appreciate you setting the stage at a big picture level. And so I guess where I come in here to the audience is want to shift to kind of in the trenches and then talk about how we can partner together. So I wear a couple different hats for my bald little head. The role that I'm in today is as a consultant with my consulting firm, and I'm a consulting partner to the Indiana Youth Institute and also a technical assistance provider to Mentor Indiana. So I work with all kinds of nonprofit and public sector youth organizations that do college and career stuff, out of school time, after school programming, summer programming, that sort of thing. My other hat is I'm actually a faculty member. I'm a full-time tenured associate professor at Indiana State University in the Department of Political Science. I run what used to be called the Recreation Management and Youth Leadership major. We now call that Public Lands and Recreation Administration. And I also run our nonprofit leadership program. So anything that has to do with out of school kids, the outdoors, parks, recreation camps, after school programs, tutoring programs is my area. So I'm kind of in this pivot. I'm kind of in this pivot point. What I'm going to bring to you today is from my perspectives as a faculty member, in the trenches, as a internship supervisor, an academic advisor, a student club advisor, as an in-classroom teacher, as an online teacher. But then my recommendations are going to be as a consultant to kind of the pre-K through 12 and out of school time professionals. It's my 19th year at Indiana State in this role. It's my 25th in higher education and my 31st year in the youth work field. So I hope that'll bring some credibility to maybe some of my thoughts that I'm going to share today. All that being said is I'd like to share first what I'm going to call my generalized observations of current college students. The other thing that I should really clearly mention is I'm speaking as a private consultant today. I'm not representing Indiana State University, and I'm not speaking for Indiana State University. I'm speaking as a private consultant and really trying to help with our nonprofit partners and our K through 12 partners as a consultant. But here's what I'm seeing in the trenches at a public 4-year, not highly selective in terms of admissions type university with actually the most diverse campus in the state of Indiana, something we're very proud of at Indiana State University. So here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some extreme generational differences in terms of how COVID's impacted us. For me, it was just the break I needed where I was in the career. I went home for 3 semesters. I watched Netflix. I spent time with my kids. We played in the yards. And when it was time to go back to work, I just went back to work. I didn't have I guess I don't feel like the pandemic and the lockdown impacted me negatively. In fact, for me, it was probably exactly what my emotional health and wellness needed, was a break from the rat race. But what we're seeing with middle school, high school, and the students have matriculated on our campuses is what we're calling the COVID-19 hangover. You're seeing in some of the literature now, this idea that when they were locked down and online, all they wanted to do was be back on campus and engaged. And now that they're back, they don't really understand how to engage. They're not fully living campus life, which is having some negative implications. I'm noting and observing a significant and drastic delay in social and emotional development, or SEL, an inability to effectively communicate with others, an inability to initiate and sustain authentic friendships, an inability to disconnect from inauthentic technology-based social media connections and other 24-hour negative news cycles, which really impacts their view of the future as being negative than positive. A real inability, and please catch me on this one here, really even our best students, they have a real inability in general to struggle, rest, reassess, adjust, and then positively move forward in their decision-making processes, as opposed to their things are going well, they hit a single speed bump, they struggle, and then the house of cards just falls and they quit responsibilities en masse. They go from 18 hours, 2 majors and 3 minors and honors and student club president and vice president for 3 clubs and 2 part-time jobs to just disappearing from campus seemingly overnight. And so really that struggle to kind of say, okay, I've overcommitted myself. I need to responsibly disengage from that. Maybe I don't need that 3rd minor. Maybe I can do an online course in the summer and drop down to 15 hours. It's just that systematic decision-making. It's just kind of an all or nothing approach. And it's a concern of mine as a faculty member. An inability to recognize their deep need to invest in authentic relationships and community with others. So going back to Michelle's presentation on that second to last slide, I think it said that human literacy component, the ability to make small talk and ask somebody to go to lunch at residence hall dining, and the ability to make real authentic relational connections with people. And then, you know, I think the output of all this is this real and diagnosable significant increase in mental health issues that we're seeing on campuses, and I'm sure all you are seeing in your roles too. So that said, we can't do it alone in higher ed in terms of persistence to graduation. Once they get to us and get admitted and get on our campuses, all of their baggage and emotional wellness and the same concerns you have come with them to campus. And so we can't address this problem in silos. We really need to do it from a systems approach. And how can we as youth work professionals in and out of school, pre-K through 12, out of school time, the post-secondary environment, like a college campus, and then career, how can we work together? And so I want to offer two opportunities. One is at the pre-K through 12 and out of school level, and that's where I'm going to spend about 10 minutes on that I have today. And it gets a little wordy up above, but think about what I'm saying there. How do we accelerate pre-post-secondary student preparedness before post-secondary attempts? Meaning, what can we do to partner together so that they can get more prepared when they're in, let's say, 7 through 12, so that they're more prepared when they get here on their first try? That's one area that I think we have to work together on and find a better systems approach that doesn't seem to be working right now. The second one is we have to find a way to connect a student's network when they're on a campus like Indiana State University or Ball State or Notre Dame or Ivy Tech back to their home network. And so much of what we're seeing in persistence, at least at Indiana State in my office, is it's not that they can't do the work, it's that they got so much going on in life. They're taking care of younger siblings 3 hours back home. They're working 3 jobs. They're taking care of an elderly parent. They're responsible for a household at no fault of their own. There's all these social and family issues back home that they don't get the time and space to have their head in school and campus life. And so as I consult with many of your organizations around the state through IYI, the goal is, you know, to get them into a 21st century scholars program, get their FAFSA, get them admitted, maybe find a scholarship. And then it's a celebration when we send Johnny off with his high school diploma to one of our campuses around Indiana, as if our work is done. But for me, that's where the work starts. And they're just often unprepared to settle into campus life and to have the people skills and time management skills and adulting skills to really flourish here. So I guess I'm suggesting, without violating FERPA, how can we connect a faculty advisor like me back to the mentor that they had at school back home, so that we can help that that student navigate home life and campus life while they're away from home. So I really want to kind of set that idea aside about connecting campus life and home life, and go back to the first idea is how do we work together to help better prepare students before they get to college campus. And with that, my core suggestion here is that we need to have intentional curricular, co-curricular, and out of school time program design rooted in the theory of planned behavior that focuses on increasing social and emotional learning, or what we all call affectionately SEL, as well as self-efficacy. And so there's a lot of out of school programs. There's after school programs that are really extended school day. They're tutoring, they increase reading comprehension and math achievement and those sorts of things. But we really don't have a blanket majority of programs really working on skills that are impacting persistence issues when they're on our campuses. And so I want to talk a little bit about what program design looks like, and then how you can actually build in as short-term outcomes, SEL and self-efficacy development, to give those students, or to develop those tools in students so that they can adjust and thrive on our campuses and then persist to graduation. So as I tell my program evaluation and program design students and all my clients, anytime we talk about program outcomes, it comes back to this bit of a riddle that I like to communicate. It's really the first step of program planning is program evaluation planning. And the first step of program evaluation planning is program logic modeling. And that logic model needs to be based on the developmental needs of your students. And so I think we have to take a really deep look at what are their real needs so that they can persist to post-secondary completion, and how do we do that before they get to our campus. And so many of our programs are not necessarily focusing on the specific skills that they actually need to persist once they get to us. So if you're not familiar with logic models, they're essentially a big picture view or flow of materials inputs that are invested into activities that are outputs that are needed to produce the desired results of an organization. So the desired result should be the developmental progress in certain skill areas for the youth that you serve. So a lot of people struggle with logic modeling and program design. And what I like to share is that you just can't download one off of Google Images and fill in your information and send it into the United Way or to the foundation. It's going to require one. You actually have to use that logic modeling process as the skeleton of your program design, so you can produce the developmental outcomes that you're trying to produce. And so, if you're going to design a program with strong content validity, you need to really use theory well and be very pracademic and bridge theory and practice in your program design. When you have strong content validity, I call it a real layered strength in your program design. So logic models, if they were a sidewalk or an interstate, when you look through the concrete, we have rebar, and most logic models are one-dimensional. They at face value, they're just very one-dimensional. And a good logic model that has content validity has layered strength, which is when we overlay the rebar like this and interact so it makes the interstate or the sidewalk stronger. When you do that, you have more content validity, which makes your program design more likely to produce the outcomes that you're trying to produce related to SEL and self-efficacy. Now, I know we're running out of time. Nathan, can I have a couple extra minutes past 12:55? Okay, so I want to kind of get to the logic model here. The one thing we need to think about in program design is that there are three psychological domains. You have cognitive as a psychological domain, which is your thinking. You have your psychomotor, which is basically your doing or your behavioral. And then you have your affective, your emotional area. And so I have a famous quote there by Maya Angelou that really talks about the affective psychological domain, and recognize when you really think about most of our youth program design, whether it's curricular, co-curricular, out of school, so much of it is based on the cognitive development and the behavioral development, and we leave out the affective. And so much of what we're dealing with in terms of college students and persistence, it's the affective, it's the social and emotional learning and the relational and human literacy skills, but we're not building those skills in the programs to get them ready for campus. And so thinking about the role of the affective domain and program design is critical, and that's your first level of rebar. And then your second level of rebar in your layered strength for content validity is the Search Institute's 40 developmental assets. Your third level of rebar is really practically used in Bronfenbrenner's ecology of human development in your program design, especially with school, family, community partnerships. And then the last layer that I'll talk about today is the theory of planned behavior. This theory has been tested over and over again, from whether somebody's going to eat a low cholesterol diet to whether somebody that's going to wear their seatbelt, or whether they're going to do leave no trace on a hike. Particularly, I encourage you to Google theory of planned behavior and look at this. But what this theory does is protects behavior. And almost all of our out of school, or all of our youth and educational and coeducational programming, is about developing skills that become behaviors. The best way to predict behavior is to predict intention, and we predict behavioral intention through three variables: attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. So this idea is, if somebody has a more favorable attitude towards the behavior, they're more likely to do the behavior. Subjective norms is basically the people who are most influential in a child's life at that particular time. And in infancy and young childhood, it's the parents and maybe the siblings. In middle school, it's the peer group. By late high school, college, and young adulthood, it's going to be the intimate or romantic partner. Maybe by 65, 70 years old, let's say 30, 40, 50 years old, it's your spouse or partner. And then let's say in early and late older adulthood, it's probably going to be your adult children that have the most influence over your behavior. So whoever that is at time, with the kids we're dealing with, it's the peer group. The last one is perceived behavioral control. That's what Dr. Asian actually calls self-efficacy. Many of you have heard the term self-efficacy, the ability to produce a desired result, by Dr. Alan Bandura. Dr. Asian actually builds this model based on Bandura's work of self-efficacy and calls it perceived behavioral control. Now, if you see the dotted line that goes from perceived behavioral control to behavior, basically that's the chute, that's the speed chute that basically says, if you can increase self-efficacy, you can get people to do the behaviors that you want to do. But most of our programs do not focus on building self-efficacy. What this theory is saying is, if we increase self-efficacy, we can actually change behaviors far more likely. If you had to put like percentages on what it takes to change behaviors or to conform to behaviors that a program wants, it's like 10 to 15% attitude, it's 10 to 15% subjective norm, and it's about 70 to 80% perceived behavioral control. So how are you going to spend your resources in your program design? It should be on how do we increase perceived behavioral control or self-efficacy, not necessarily on more math achievement, more reading comprehension, and other things that take up program resources. So here's an example of a logic model. And when you look at this logic model, you may not see the layered strength, but when you dig deeper, you're going to see the layers of rebar in this. First thing is overlay the theory of planned behavior, and that behavior on the far right becomes the long-term outcome of your logic model, which just popped up there in the far right corner. Now, the next thing that we have to look at is, how do we build in attitude, subjectives, and subjective norms and perceived behavioral control? You can see the middle four columns are going to be divided into three rows, where we have a section for attitudes, a section for subjective norms, and a section for perceived behavioral control, which is also known as self-efficacy. So the presentation today is about SEL and self-efficacy. Social and emotional learning is going to go in that subjective norms, that middle row. And social emotional learning is things like self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. It's that human literacy. And so that's going to fall into column 3 of your short-term outcomes. And they're going to read something like this: demonstrate social competence by appropriately expressing their emotions, increasing their social competence among peers, multi-generational family members, and multi-generational non-family adults. Now you can see the Search Institute numbers there. The SI numbers are the relevant Search Institute assets that overlay with that particular outcome related to SEL. These are very specific outcomes to increase SEL that you can build into your program design, starting with your logic model. Same thing you can do with perceived behavioral control or self-efficacy, an individual's ability to produce a desired result, which is not the same as self-esteem and self-confidence. You can see that we lay that into the perceived behavioral control column 3 there, and they read like this. Now notice many of them are cognitive. These are specific behaviors that increase self-efficacy, things you can do from program design to increase self-efficacy. Learning achievement. Can they demonstrate the ability to complete independent living skills? Laundry, grocery shopping, cooking. Resource acquisition. Can they demonstrate the ability to identify needed personal resources, navigate the process and bureaucracy, and acquire the needed resource? Learning achievement, again, organize and plan personal finances, demonstrate the ability to set and monitor goals on personal goals. Planning and decision making, demonstrating the ability to develop and implement reasonable and timely solutions. And notice those are all cognitive in terms of psychological domains, but there's also behavioral and affective ways to increase self-efficacy. Personal responsibility, practicing daily healthy living habits, positive self-talk and positive view of the future, and personal power, saying more positive things about themselves than negative, articulating a positive personal life purpose statement, and feeling that they have control over things that happen to them. So when you think about your program design before they go to college, think about how you can integrate SEL and self-efficacy into the outcomes that you're measuring into your curricular, co-curricular, and out-of-school program design. And I will turn it back over to Nathan.
Thank you, Dr. Schaumaffel. Share my screen up here as we wrap up. I know there's a lot of information there for everybody. We are going to share the presentation. It will be sent out to you. Aaron in the chat also sent a link out to anybody who wanted to see the slides now. But understanding, you know, as in our programs and into our curriculum, that we're building these skills and building SEL skills, building some efficacy into those skills, being the groundwork to really develop, you know, the skills that are going to be needed for these students to succeed. I want to thank Michelle and Nathan again. On the horizon for everybody, we had the Kids Count Conference for IYI. Huge conference, so many wonderful sessions, greatly priced in Indianapolis. Please consider coming. The registration is there on the screen. You can also find it on our website. We have our college and career counseling consulting grant opening up on Tuesday. So if you are a college and career, if you have a program, we have consulting up to 40 hours with an IYI consultant. So please consider applying for that opportunity. We have a number of cafes on the horizon coming up, a lot of great topics. We have a couple webinars. On November 9th, we have our next college and career webinar, which is with the Indiana Commission of Higher Education over the Better FAFSA and 21st Century Scholars. We do offer professional development grants at IYI and specifically for college and career readiness. So if you are looking for a conference or training or workshop in your college and career, worker, please fill out one of those opportunities and we'll hopefully provide you with that opportunity. We want to thank everybody again for joining us, for being a leader, for being a partner with IYI. Later on, you'll receive an email with a link to complete the evaluation in the webinar. Please take a few minutes to fill that out. Once you complete the certificate, complete the evaluation, you'll be getting your certificate of completion. Thank you for everybody for coming today. I hope the information was helpful, and we appreciate the work you do with Indiana youth.